The Boston Bruins Centennial season is underway. They are 1-0 after beating Connor Bedard and the Chicago Blackhawks on Wednesday night. We are going to talk about all of it, the celebration pregame, what happened on the ice, expectations for this team, and I'm going to be joined by a special guest here on today's episode of Locked On Boston Bruins. So let's get right into it, shall we?
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked B, and we have a regular season game to break down on the podcast today as the Bruins won their season opener last night against Connor Bedard and the Chicago Blackhawks. Nick Foligno, Taylor Hall, Ryan Donato were also in the house. We're going to get into all of it here coming up in a moment. I want to thank you, first of all, for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine. We are free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more right now. New customers can get a $5 bet, get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed by visiting fanduel.com/lockedon to get started. On today's show, I'm going to be joined by Mike Miccoli, a Bruins writer who has been a long time follow for me. I love his coverage, have since the 2011 Cup and even before that. We both wrote back in the day for the Hockey Writers. He was on the pod back during the playoffs, and I'm excited to be chatting about the Centennial, about the Boston Bruins, and what was a very memorable night. Yes, Connor Bedard scored his first career goal against Linus Ullmark, but that's all the offense the Blackhawks were able to muster. David Pastrnak with a pair, Trent Frederick with a goal as well to lead the Boston Bruins to victory. Milan Lucic made his presence felt. Just a great game overall, tempered by the fact that the Blackhawks were playing their second game in 2 nights. You could really see some fatigue settling in during the third period. But we're going to get into all that here coming up in a moment with Mike Miccoli. Quick reminder, you can find the podcast on Twitter, Instagram at Locked NHL Bruins, X as it's now known. And you can find me, my dad jokes, hockey thoughts on X, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky at Ian C. McLaren. All right, that's all by way of introduction. Let's now get into my chat here today with Mike Miccoli. All right, pleased to be joined once again here on the podcast by Mike Miccoli. As I said earlier, Mike's been a guy that I have been following for, I don't know, probably since I jumped on Twitter. Longtime Bruins writer, excited that he's back. We can talk about your where people can find where you're writing these days later on. But I wanted to start, I don't know if I've ever asked you this, but, you know, it's the Centennial season. A lot of memories popping up for our Bruins fans. I talked about yesterday on the podcast how my probably biggest moment as a kid that made me fall in love with the Bruins was the 50-44 for Cam Neely. What was your big moment that really solidified your devotion to the Boston Bruins?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would honestly say that's probably up there with mine, but maybe to give you a slightly different answer, those Reggie Lemelin, Andy Moog years,
Yeah.
where I believe it was either 93 or 94, battling against the Canadiens in the playoffs. Yep. Reggie Lemelin had that incredible series. Yes. My dad grew up a huge Bruins fan, obviously, so as soon as I was able to start watching the games and really start taking it in. My earliest memories of even watching television were the Bruins. So,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah,
you're very late '80s team. I'm an '86 baby, so you're very late '80s teams, early '90s. Um, it was always so much fun, I think, in the mid '90s watching those teams too, because they were always really good, but they weren't really obviously they never won anything. But
yeah,
your Ray Bork, Adam Oates, Cam Neely, Craig Janney, those teams are just those always stick out in my mind as like your ultimate like your Bruins teams, for at least
yeah,
for my generation. Yeah,
yeah, same. And I'm so glad that they have that look for this season. With
yeah,
those jerseys for me are the spoke to be that they have at center ice right now. TD Garden that's it for me. I hope
beautiful.
they
It's
keep that look.
beautiful.
I hope they keep that look beyond this season for sure. It's funny you
Yeah,
mentioned like earliest TV memories. I think it was like '88. They played a series against the Sabres, and I had this vivid memory of this small TV that we had where I'd put it on. They played the pregame intro, and I was just like, "Oh, I can't wait for this to get started."
yeah,
And yeah, I think they went to the Cup final that year. One of
yep,
those losses to the Oilers.
yeah, yeah.
Speaking of the past, obviously the big part of last night was the Centennial Celebration. So many faces from the past that came out. Kind of those post Neely Oates Bork years were pretty lean. I talked yesterday how they won like one playoff series over the course of 13, 14 years. But one guy that I loved seeing last night was Sergei Samsonov, 98
Mhm.
Calder Trophy winner. Hadn't seen him in quite some time. Were there any faces that stood out to you that was pretty cool to see? Tim Thomas, always great to see him around the Bruins. But anybody else that popped out to you?
Yeah, I mean, Samsonov's up there for me. I think thanks to all the games of Puckdoku that I played over the summer, like realizing, oh my God, Samsonov played for all of these teams. Like he was just
Yeah,
like your go-to answer, right?
yeah, yeah,
Um, Tim Thomas for sure. I think the fact that they got Phil Esposito back is
yeah.
that was very surprising to see him, especially because all the times they celebrated that the 70 or the 72 Cup teams, he was never there. He's obviously was very outspoken
Mhm.
about his experience in Boston at the time, and I think it was really great to see him back. But over the summer when they did the Bear Tracks with in Vermont with Tim Thomas,
Yeah.
that to me was like it was such a special moment because I that Thomas has been through so much, and post hockey had a really difficult relationship with I think his celebrity, and if
Mm.
you want to call it that, and
Yep.
his relationship to the game. So obviously we haven't seen him in quite some time. So the fact that he is becoming more comfortable with getting himself out there and really being able to get his due get his due celebrations
Mhm.
and have people really celebrate what he meant to the team, rightfully so. I think that's really great. But great to see guys like Sean Barton out there too.
Yes.
Obviously guys who have relationships with other teams that are with other teams.
Yep.
Um, I thought that was really cool. But yeah, I think Tim Thomas for me, see with Espo, seeing them both back was really special.
Yeah. I mean, even just thinking about Tim Thomas, like we all remember the cup win, but
Mhm.
his story getting to that point was
Yeah,
really unreal. Like kind of a
yeah,
Disney movie level unlikely success story. So yeah, it's great to see him back. I mentioned this on Twitter this morning. One guy I really hope they can incorporate into the celebration and kind of along the same lines as Espo had a bit of a rocky end to it is Joe Thornton. I really hope they bring him back at some point as well. He was first overall pick. He was the captain for a bit. Obviously, didn't work out, and you could argue that trade set the stage for them to add Chara, Savard, and really
sure.
set the next wave off. But I hope he can be part of it as well. It'd be cool to see Nathan Horton at one of these things as well in person. That'd be really cool.
I actually think along with Thornton, Nathan Horton's probably up there for someone he keeps a really low profile these days. Like obviously Joe Thornton doesn't keep a low profile, but his relationship with Boston is certainly complicated. The fact that it's somewhat of a new, I mean, it's a new regime. Like obviously the Jacobs family is still the ownership. And I think being able to come back and be a part of what the franchise, like celebrating the franchise's history, what it's done for the game, what it's done for hockey in general. I think, come get your applause, come get your celebrations, especially
sure.
him being a captain too.
Yeah, exactly. Jason Allison, captain there for a bit. Maybe he'll pop back too. All right, we're going to get into
I was actually wondering too, like, sorry, I was actually wondering too, like, who is going to be the most, like, the one player who is unexpected that you wouldn't expect to see at the celebration, but I think the fact that Samsonov was there is
really, you look like Christian Slater out there with the glasses and the hair. It was great. Anyways, we'll get into what actually took place on the ice here coming up in a moment, but first let's get to a word from one of today's sponsors. Snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose on that initial minimum $5 bet. So if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options like spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get in on the action this NFL season. FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL. All right, so when it comes to the product on the ice last night, of course, the Bruins beating the Chicago Blackhawks 3-1. Not surprising at all that Connor Bedard got his first goal of the season or of his career against the Bruins. For me, it was a solid effort from the Bruins. I think Jim Montgomery said they kind of looked average, maybe a function of Chicago playing their second game of the season already last night. What were your overall impressions of what the Bruins brought on the ice last night against Chicago?
Yeah, I think it's very much the first game of the season. You can tell, especially in the top six, I thought, where those lines are starting to figure out how to play with one another. Obviously, the Zacha, JVR, Pastrnak line got broken up towards the end of the game.
Yeah.
That line I felt like was maybe a little disjointed, but on the other side of that, I think the bottom six had an incredible game. Those six players really stepped up. I think the fourth line of Lucic, Beecher, and Lauko was just flying out there. And it's funny, I was looking at some of the stats, and someone like Milan Lucic only registered one hit. So it's not like you're getting your typical Milan Lucic, steamrolling everyone over. But I would agree. I think had they played a stronger team, not Chicago, I don't think this would have been a win. Right. But definitely some things to work on, and definitely some chemistry that needs to be built.
Yeah, I mean, at one point, I think Chicago was down to 10 forwards because Taylor Hall was injured. I just saw this morning he's now week to week after that Brandon Carlo hit, which is tough for him, obviously tough for that team. Then Jason Dickinson got the misconduct for the fight with John Beecher after his hit, which I saw someone calling for supplemental discipline on that Beecher hit, which I don't know if it was that egregious, but that bottom six to me, looked amazing. Matt Poitras looked fantastic to me. You see even Andrew Raycroft made the comparison to Patrice Bergeron coming in as a teenager, unexpected. For me, his game reminds me more, if we're going to make these crazy comparisons, reminds me more of a David Krejci in terms of him slowing down the game, finding that, like we saw it on that Trent Frederick goal where he curled around, found Carlo at the point, who fired it over. What are your overall impressions so far of Matt Poitras, and do you see him sticking beyond the 9 games and Boston burning that first year of his entry-level deal?
At this rate, I do.
Yeah.
When he was kind of on the bubble and it wasn't really a sure thing that he would make the team, I thought it would be, kind of a nice story. They'll give him the 10-game tryout. I think he's elevated the game of Frederick and Geeky for sure.
Mm-hmm.
That, like I said, that third line was very much like the fourth line buzzing out there. I think it's worth giving him a shot in the top 6, playing with better wingers, because I think that's where you're really going to start to see the difference.
Mm-hmm.
I like the fact that he's not afraid to shoot the puck. I think he was the most noticeable player out there when they were on the power play with man advantage. He was definitely the one orchestrating the plays. And, that second power play unit, I think, was so much better than the first power play unit. And he was a big reason why. So I would like to see him get some looks with some of the bigger players, your Pastas, your Marchand, DeBrusque, to see what he can do. But yeah, I think for a team that's so needing centers, there's no one else coming. And I don't know who's going to take that place. Like Geeky actually had, I believe he had 7 or 8 faceoffs yesterday too, last night.
Right.
So you could slot him in there and get another winger. That's where maybe Danton Heinen comes in eventually. But yeah, I mean, there's nothing right now that says he should not be on the team.
Yeah,
we'll see if that changes in the next 9 games.
I've shared this story on the podcast before, but prior to him being drafted, I was actually at a game in Guelph, and Don Sweeney was in the stands. So I went over, asked him, who are you here watching? He just said he was, at the time, he was scouting centers. So there were a couple guys on the Storm at that point that were draft eligible. David Goyette, who's another top center in the OHL, went to Seattle in the second round. He was playing that night. But now looking back and seeing what Poitras has been doing so far, it just seems like such a natural, like he just seems like prototypical Bruins forward. He had a scoring chance on one end last night, rushed back, helped break up another opportunity at the other end. I can't imagine anybody within the organization thought it would happen this soon. And I know that the Guelph Storm we're not banking on not having him back in the junior this season, but I agree with you at this point, based on last night, based on the preseason, small sample size still, but it certainly looks like he is just a part of the team at this point.
Yeah, definitely looks like he belongs.
Yeah. You mentioned the bottom 6. Lucic ended up playing on that top line for a little bit. Some shades of the old Lucic streaking down, setting up David Pastrnak's goal there. Do you think that's kind of that first game energy from Lucic, or, based on the past several seasons, he played elsewhere, not quite the same guy we saw. Maybe it's just some sort of Spider-Man energy where he's just infused with the black and gold and kicks it up a notch. What are your expectations for him as the season goes on? Probably settle in and, maybe get 30 points. I don't know. That seems maybe a bit high even too.
Yeah, that's probably a bit high. For sure he was riding the adrenaline last night, and you could I'm trying to think off the top of my head players that love being a Bruin.
Yeah.
And as much like Lucic loves it here.
Yeah.
He always has, he always did. You talk about players that didn't maybe have a great experience here. Lucic was traded and he still is I believe black and gold. This is home to me. I think it's great to see him back in Boston. I love the story of it. I love the fact that he's going to be a fourth liner. Yeah. He is someone, you could put him net front on a power play. He's going to be tough to move. He's going to be that type of guy that just, hits folks on the fourth line. He's not an offensive guy anymore.
Yeah.
The one thing that really stuck out to me in his play in the defensive zone against any other team, there would have been some problems, but he was just floating out there. It looked like he was kind of, I felt like I was watching myself play like bear league hockey, where it was just floating in between top of the circle in the point. You can't do that, against a team like Chicago, maybe, but I think it's a great story. I think it's great that he's back. He's signed for a very low cap number. I forget if it's $1 million or 1.5.
I think it's just $1 million. Yeah.
Crazy.
Crazy.
He loves being here. You want guys that want to be here. You want guys that are going to make others better.
Yeah.
He took a spin or two with the top line last night. I don't think that's going to stick, but a great story, a great player, sure. A great person. So,
and if and when Heinen signs, I mean, I don't even think he's going to be necessarily an every night player. So yeah, we'll see, but it's cool. I always think back to that Zoom they had during the pandemic where they reunited the 2011, and he was just living. He was so, you could just tell he was emotional. He was just it was really cool to see him. And I mean, it's neat to see him back in black and gold for sure. And you love to see guys who love to be in Boston for sure. And coming up after this next break, we're going to talk about overall expectations for this team coming into the season and what we can expect moving forward. But first, another word from one of today's sponsors. NHL season is finally here, and the Boston Bruins are back. We absolutely love the NHL, and I'm so thankful for all of you who join me on the podcast. And I want to tell you today about the Sleeper app. It's the official daily fantasy app of Locked On NHL Network, and it's my go-to for daily fantasy sports, especially daily fantasy hockey. With Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash on daily fantasy. How does it work? Well, NHL has never been more exciting than it is right now with stars like Connor McDavid, Jack Hughes, David Pastrnak. You can pick more or less on stats for these stars on goals, assists, saves, plus minus, and you can get a 100-time payout on Sleeper. So start paying attention and get your picks right, and you could win big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL, and you'll get a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's Locked On NHL on the Sleeper app. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. All right, continuing my chat here with Mike Miccoli and Bruins winners. I guess I should ask, what do you think of Connor Bedard on the other side? Definitely living up to the hype so far.
Yeah, it's so funny. Anytime there's a post-game intermission interview, it's Connor Bedard. I was watching the game with my wife last night, and poor guy just doesn't, between the Pittsburgh game and Boston, he just doesn't get a second to breathe. He's fun to watch. That release is something. And I was watching the game on TNT last night, and one of the things I so appreciate about that crew doing the intermission report is really breaking down how he's shooting the puck and his mechanics and how he's shifting the puck from being away from his body, closer to his body, and still being able to get it off as quick as he's able to. And that's what really screws with defensemen and goaltenders, is they're not able to track that as quick as they can.
Yeah, for sure.
I think he's going to be a very great player very quickly. And he's just watching some of the interviews too. He loves it. He loves watching. He loves playing hockey, and it's so refreshing just getting someone that's I just love to play. I just love the game. I'm just really excited to be here. So I was happy to watch him. Obviously 2 nights in a row. Looking forward to watching him for hopefully a very long time in his career. But you have these players. It's great for hockey. It really is.
Yeah, definitely. Next up for the Bruins is the Nashville Predators. We keep going on this season. It was very odd not to see Patrice Bergeron in the lineup, not as much with David Krejci because we had already gone through a season without him. Overall expectations for the Bruins this season, I think Jacobs the other day said the expectation is at least the playoffs. I still see them as a playoff team. What about you? Where do you think they can finish in the Atlantic? And do you see the playoffs as kind of the baseline for them this year?
Yeah, I think they're definitely still a playoff team. Of course, there's a considerable drop off from last year. Of course,
Yeah.
you lose that amount of play, like the amount of players that they lost, and then the record-breaking season that they have.
Yeah.
They're not going to do that again, and it's not fair to put that expectation on them.
Yeah.
I almost think that they're becoming so overrated that they're becoming underrated.
Yeah.
In the sense of a lot of folks are sleeping on them. I think they're definitely a playoff team. Going into the season, I had them firmly as a wild card. I don't know anymore with Vasilevsky
Yeah.
being injured. I think that makes Tampa really vulnerable.
Mhm.
And I think with Florida missing Ekblad and Montour for as
Yep.
long as they're going to, I think that makes them vulnerable too.
For sure.
I think anywhere between 2, 3, 4 in Atlantic is fair. I think this is Toronto's year. I think this is if this is not Toronto's year,
Yeah.
boy, I have no idea when it's going to be Toronto's year. That's a really great team, but the Bruins for sure are still a playoff team. They have excellent defense, excellent goaltending, excellent coaching. I think the offense can put it together. Like I am expecting big years from players like Frederick, players like Geeky, really stepping up. I think I still want to see a little bit more. One game, small sample size.
Sure.
I
Yep.
still want to see a little bit more from JVR and Pavel
Yeah.
Zacha. I think that chemistry, Zacha moving from the wing to center, is going to be really important to watch. But I think they're certainly still a playoff team. I don't think they're going to win the cup this year, but I think they're going to be fun to watch, especially if they're starting to infuse younger players into the lineup.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. I think well, first of all, I think if any year was going to be Toronto's year, it was probably the COVID year where they had the chance to come out of the Canadian division. And,
That's true.
but yeah, you're right. They look pretty good. And I mean, a lot of people high on Ottawa. They did not look great last night. We'll see the Sabres tonight. They still have some question marks, I think. Bruins definitely a playoff team, I think. But yeah, I do believe that it's weird without Bergeron, without Krejci. I can't remember being this excited about a group of players. There's so many new faces, some old faces, but they still have, elite level talent in David Pastrnak.
Yeah.
Charlie McAvoy should be in the Norris conversation. They still have that goaltending tandem. We'll see if that continues next season with Swayman only having the 1-year deal. But for now, I think they're pretty well positioned to be at least fun to watch. And through the regular season, that's all you can really ask for with enough wins to get to the playoffs.
I forgot who said it too, where it was like, after such a awful collapse last year, the vibes around the team are very positive and very good. And like everyone came to camp prepared. And, I think one of the reasons why it's really great having Marchand as captain, he's been the one constant from the time he was drafted. He's seen all these playoff collapses. He's won a championship. He's won the cup. Yep. And for him to really be the connector in the thread to pull everything together and pull this current team together of like, guys on 1-year deals, guys just starting in the NHL, veterans. I think that's a really important voice to have.
Yeah. And I wanted to mention too, speaking of Marchand, it was amazing to see him on that empty net goal, just pass it over to Pastrnak, give him the goal. Unselfish. That's good leadership right there. And really cool to see him get his first point as captain. Mike, I can't thank you enough for jumping on today, and hopefully we'll connect a few times during the season. Tell people where you are sharing your Bruins thoughts these days.
Yeah, so like most writers, I now have a Substack, so you can find it at therunner.substack.com. Bruin stuff about culture, being a dad. Now that hockey's obviously back in, I think there's going to be a lot of hockey. So really excited to do that. It's going to be coming out on a weekly, bi-weekly basis. You can subscribe using an email. It's free.
So. I'm a subscriber. It's great stuff. Mike, always a pleasure. And let's do this regularly if we can throughout the season. That'd be amazing.
Definitely. Thanks a lot for having me on, Ian. Appreciate it.
No problem. All right, friends, that is it for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining me here. And on tomorrow's podcast, we'll preview the weekend's game against the Predators, bring you all the latest here on the Black and Gold, here on Locked On Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day.